Good afternoon. I'm Sharon and welcome to my Book and Wine Club for the month of May. This month, my book that I picked for us to read was The Queen of Paris by Pamela Binnings Ewen. It is the story of Coco Chanel. And let me tell you something, if you haven't read this, you'll never ever think of Chanel number 5 the same way you did before. A great book, a great read. And if you haven't read it yet, I am looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it as we go forward. This month, we interviewed the author. We had a discussion with her a few days ago via Zoom, myself and a number of my followers. And so instead of me talking to you about the book this month, I'd much rather for you to hear from the author herself as to her opinions of Chanel and why she wrote the book, and some of the things that she decided to put into the book that will just take your breath away. So with that, here we go. We're going to zoom in. Well, I want to thank you guys all for joining us. With us today, we have Pamela Binnings Ewen, who is the author of this lovely book that we read. You guys all see that, the Queen of Paris. And I really, really, truly enjoyed reading the book and getting to learn about your writing style, Pamela, and of course, learning about Coco Chanel. A lot I didn't know about her. So I kind of went into it without having any sort of, preconceived notions, and I was quite surprised. So I just wanted to start off with everyone introducing themselves. We have it all here. Let's start. I am Sharon. I am the host here today. With us, we have Kristine Jacobson. Kristine, introduce yourself just real quickly.
Hi, I'm Kristine Jacobson. I am an avid reader. I love historical fictions, probably my favorite genre. So I was delighted to read your book, and I'm very excited to meet you.
Amy, I know you're not Bailey the cat, so we'll go with Amy.
Posing as Bailey the cat. I love history and historical fiction.
All right, and Rita, introduce yourself really quick once you get set up there.
Rita Seymour from Canada. I started with this book club because of Sharon, and I found this book extremely interesting. I didn't really know much about Coco Chanel, but after reading it, I ended up looking into it more, and I just found it a very interesting person in time, actually. So that's where I'm coming from.
So with that, Pamela, I wanted to sort of start this off with, I've read your book club kit, and you were fascinated. You said that you knew you'd have to write this book when several years ago you came across photographs of those files, information, the documents conflicted with everything that you thought you knew about this glittery, glamorous woman. So, kind of take us through sort of that motivation for why you picked it. I mean, there's so many crazy folks, that you could have written about. Why Coco Chanel?
Well, I think it's because she was, her public persona was so different. It's such a conflict with who she really was. And my husband had read the book, Sleeping with the Enemy. You might remember there was a book about 15 years ago named that, and they made a movie out of it, and it was about an abusive marriage. So people get that mixed up. But this book is put out by Random House about 7 years ago by Hal Bond. And it's called Sleeping with the Enemy. And when he said, you have to read this, it's so interesting. When I read it and saw what was going on, not only actually going on, but her mindset, it was so shocking because she had such a defined brand and such a defined image. And here's this woman that was just the opposite. I had thought of Coco Chanel as, I always think of her perfume when I think of her. And I thought of her as just sort of a pretty little Parisian lady who made hats, started off making hats, and then went into the couture business and was one of the richest women in the world and one of the most famous women in the world. And when the book showed her personality as extremely narcissistic and self-absorbed, but the most interesting thing to me was distant. But her biographies are sort of, most of them, at least particularly the ones by people who knew her personally, they're just sort of notoriously unreliable, because she would threaten to sue if she didn't like what they were saying, and she'd make the biographers change it and everything. She had an image she was establishing. It's just like these sayings, the sayings that you read about. Coco Chanel said, a woman without Chanel number 5 is an unhappy woman, or not a woman, or something like that. All those little sayings, she worked on them hard. She worked on them for weeks and weeks, each one of them, and she'd get it down to perfection, and then she'd be in a press conference and it would just sort of roll off her lips like it was impromptu, and everybody thought, this is what an amazing woman. She comes up with all these fabulous quotes. It was all generated. It was all, it was all created a certain way by her to portray a certain image. So in this book, her anti-Semitism I had never heard of, but I didn't really follow her much. But what I knew, anti-Semitism had never come into it. Her anti-Semitism was actually vicious. She was also so uninvolved with the war, because Sleeping with the Enemy, although it goes through her whole life in a sense of her personality being different, her history being different from what I had thought, but the concentration of that book was on the 4 years of the war when the Nazis occupied Paris. And she was so distant from it that it just amazed me. And I thought, of all, I've never read a book, a fiction, historical fiction, ever about Coco Chanel, which dealt with her war years in a real way, really told the story. But the truth of it was, I saw the documents were in this book, Sleeping with the Enemy. There were photographs of them, and they were military files that were just recently released not long ago. And they actually showed her being recruited to the Abwehr, which was German military intelligence, and showed her spy numbers, showed her signature, showed the date, showed everything. Her code name was Westminster, one of her lovers. So when I saw that, I thought, not only is this intriguing because it's so conflicted with her public image, but it also was a story that had never been told before that I knew of, except in this nonfiction book. So that was my motivation. Yeah.
One thing I was intrigued by is sort of her character arc. One of the challenges that we have in writing historical fiction is sort of the license that you take and the assumptions you make on real people in terms of the growth and that arc you put them through to keep the story moving. And how do you feel, having written it, about her character arc in, I want to say this, in the book versus real life? Do you believe that she grew in that way, that she found what lessons did she learn? Do you feel that the lessons that she learned in this writing that you've done really portrayed her life in real life, or is it?
Yes, I think I portrayed her in real life. There's a frame of the story. It's like if you create a frame, and the frame are the facts, and those have to be real. I mean, you have to get the basic frame of the story correct. That she was an actual spy, that she was anti-Semitic, that she did go on spy missions for the Abwehr, that she was distant from everything, and that, but also I wanted to know why. I mean, the big question I came out with that made me want to go further actually was, why did she do the things she did? Why did she make these decisions? Because she was the richest woman in the world when the war started. And that sort of changed when she lost access to her banks in Switzerland, her accounts in Switzerland. And so money became a problem for her during the war a little bit. But why did she do all of these things? So you create a frame of the facts. And then since you all love historical fiction, you'll recognize what I'm saying. Within that frame, things happen in her life that no one's put together before. For example, there's someone she loves very much. Her relationship to this person is really, her legal relationship to this person is really not important. What's important is that she loved this person so much. And so that was answered one of the questions of why would she become a spy? And I don't want to say too much more about that, but if you put it into context, you've got a terrible decision to make. On the one hand, she's spying against her country and it's treason, and she knows that. On the other hand, if it was for money, that would make her a different person. If it was to engender affection from the Nazi hierarchy, that would make her a different person too. But if it's really truly because she loved this person, then we have to ask ourselves, well, what would I have done? What if it was my child or my husband or my wife or my grandmother? Would I have done that to save them? So that was the interesting question to me, and it sort of sort of duplicate trails of her personality going up. One is the why and one is what she did. How do they match up, and do they justify the things she did?
I have questions for the audience, or for Kristine and for others on the line. Did your opinion of Coco Chanel change because of what you've read in this book? I mean,
radically.
Yes, just want to get some of y'all's thoughts on how your opinion.
Oh, there's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Kristine, maybe.
Yeah. So I'm so conflicted by this. My favorite fragrance is Mademoiselle. I wear it all the time. My grandmother, I grew up smelling Chanel No. 5 and owning the pearls and the little black dress and wanting to aspire to that. So when I was initially reading and just seeing her abrasiveness, which makes sense, a businesswoman in a man's business world, she was self-made, etc. But she was so distant. It was the word you used. She was so distant. She was actually cruel in a lot of ways. But then you weaved in her backstory, which made me feel sympathetic for her. And even what we were just talking about a minute ago about the person she loved, again, that drew in some sympathy for her. The fear of losing No. 5, again, drew in some sympathy. But then the things she did to enable those things not to happen, it was a parallel. I hated her one minute and I felt bad for her the next minute. So my perception of her has changed drastically because I just know more about her. But I also have a deep sympathy for her because, like you said, how do we know how we would act if we were in that situation, right, in that time of the world?
As far as the exact question you had, she's very complex. I think it presents a complex view of the person and some of the decisions she might have had to go through. And it's a really tough question. I liked the way that you presented her thoughts, her hesitations, her drive, making her a nice, complex person.
All right. Rita, do you have anything to add in terms of your impressions? Yeah, come off mute now, though. Oh, yeah.
I knew absolutely nothing about her other than my mom used to have a perfume. So reading this was, like I said, I ended up looking more into it. And I think for what she went through, she was pretty gutsy. And you probably had to be as mean as she was to get where she was.
From my perspective, like I said, I came into this not knowing a whole lot about her at all. I was surprised how naive she was in a lot of ways. I mean, when I first started reading the book, I did the math. I figured out when she was born, and she's about my age in 1940. And I was surprised that someone in her late 50s was so naive about the world. Yes, she was very self-absorbed and very narcissistic in a lot of ways. And it was enlightening to me that she was able to control herself so well, I think. But yet at the same time, she was so naive. Did you guys catch any? Did you feel that way about it at all when you're reading that? Didn't she feel a little almost immature in some ways?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you on her maturity, and even just cultural awareness. Someone who, is so, the vision of culture and the vision of, couture, yet she still, I mean, even the fact that Westminster didn't marry her and she thought for sure he was going to marry her. I mean, that was just really, even early in the book, just those kinds of things that you think that she would have a deeper understanding of, she didn't. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying about her.
She had an interesting saying about Westminster, because he was evidently a big ladies' man, and she wanted him to marry her, and he really did do that to her. Totally shocked her. But so after that, she was protecting herself, and when people asked her why she didn't marry Westminster, her answer always was, well, there will be many, whatever you call it, duchesses of Westminster, but there's only one Chanel.
I've read some of the critiques on Goodreads and others about the book, and it's interesting how people are reacting to the book sometimes negatively, right? Based on the character of Chanel. It's like,
right.
You are getting backlash, my dear.
Because, oh, yeah.
She's not sympathetic.
It really is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
But Coco was amazingly hard because she was just, the only question you could ask is, why did she do these things? That's the only question, because she did do them.
So in your research, you said you worked with 4 years, 5 years on the book. How much of that time was research versus, how much was it when you started to write? Did you do 2-3 years worth at first?
I'd say about 2/3 of it was research.
Yeah.
About 1/3 is writing, and I do a lot of rewriting too.
I was curious a little bit as to on characters for a second. You chose Elaine, and I can't do the French thing. So Elaine Hobert, who was the confidant of Pierre, her business partner. You chose him in some of the, to reflect on Pierre and not Pierre. And I was curious as to why. From a point of view, when you're talking about those upfront chapters where you had Elaine or Alan, whatever his name, Elaine versus Pierre, there were some decisions you made as an author there. Curious as to kind of what drove you to his.
Well, a couple of things I'll say. First of all, Alain Jobert.
So you did it right.
I changed his name, actually. I originally had his name Jacques, I think it was, or something, but I learned that Pierre Wertheimer's son was named that, and I wanted to distance Alain a little bit from Pierre Wertheimer. In historical fiction, from a legal point of view, I didn't want to mess around with their brand. I wanted to protect that brand and stay away from that. And so I wanted Alain to be sort of very, very much on the outside looking in on things, For instance, it is true that Pierre's right-hand man did go to Paris, and he did take the formula out of the safe. And it was a secret formula, and it was never supposed to be moved from the safe. And he did take it and get it back to Pierre in New York. And that just absolutely infuriated her. I have to say that last chapter was my favorite thing to write too. I loved
What I
writing.
found interesting is that, you know, that comes to that naivete again, or her own sense of, you know, paranoia or whatever you want to call it. I think sometimes that she was really not as mature as I would have thought she would have been, considering the age that she was and all that she had been through during the war. And so that was to me, it was interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I don't think she's a very good businesswoman, actually.
No, I think you captured it really well in the hearing, the hearing that they did. You know, I can't remember.
On the claim.
Yes, it was clear that she'd not been through that before,
Right, right.
and was not very, very good. Well, you just can't do that. And so, you know, I could see her. You did a great job of, I think, of visualizing
Oh, thank you.
that. So you could see her throwing her hands up and.
That was fun to write, actually. I had a good time writing.
You probably had some clients like that in your day, huh?
I know. Absolutely.
Another thing I thought was interesting as well was that you chose first person for Gabrielle and then sort of third person for Coco. Did you guys notice that in the heads nodding? Your thoughts about that?
I liked the idea of being in Coco's head, but looking back a little bit, you know, stepping back a little bit so you could tell the story, not only as she sees it, but as maybe the world saw it, but before everything's revealed. But in the past, I wanted it to be first person. I wanted it to be very intimate and present, and I wanted it to be clear that it was still a part of her. It wasn't gone. It was still a part of her. Everything was a part of her. So that was just the reason I made that choice. Some people didn't like it. I mean, I've had some reviews where people have said that was off-putting to them, but you know, sometimes you can break the rules if you have a real reason. And I really wanted that past to be not only past but present, if you know what I mean, part of her.
I really liked it because it made it more intimate. If that
Intimate, right?
Yeah, it made you feel again that sympathy, that intimacy, that kept me liking her and asking the whys. That if I didn't have that piece, I might just be reading her as ruthless.
So I'm going to ask the audience real quick, a quick question. Unsung heroes, always like those. Can any of you guys think of, besides, you know, we're not going to talk about Coco for a minute, but unsung heroes in the book that just struck you as people that stood out, those sort of secondary characters? Kristine, you're always good at your unsung heroes, and then I'll go to the rest of you guys.
Yeah, I feel like I'm cheating a little, but my unsung hero was Alon. So we've just learned that you have plans for him, so I'm excited about that.
I think the same as Kristine said, and him being the one and knowing that he's going to be in a future book is pretty cool too. So that's about the only one that really sticks out. But I have to say, I like what you do, and I'm not going to say it without giving it away, what you do with the nephew.
Well, mine was Gerard.
You know who I like was Colette. Colette fascinated me. I was so surprised. It's true that she wrote Gigi during the war. And I do think that Colette was the most famous writer in France at the time. And I think when she was writing Gigi, from everything I've read, it appears to me that that was her way of getting away from the war and getting away from all the fears she had for her husband. I thought a fascinating thing about Coco was that she was able to have personal relationships with Jewish people, and yet she could ignore all that was happening to the Jewish people during the war with the Nazis. That was a fascinating thing to me.
Like, I think that because she had so much to go through and was so self-reliant, she maybe had this concept that these people can help themselves out, even though she really was putting blinders on.
Well, I think there's something, one thing I always like to say, and I really truly believe this, is that we have to judge people not by the moral standards of our time, but by the moral standard of their time. And then we get into a lot of discussion here in Virginia on the topic of slavery and, and all that, and Jefferson and founding fathers. And it's the same question. You have to look at it through
Right.
the lens of what that person was living in. In 1940, women did not have this, in Europe, they did not have the same rights that they had today. Coco Chanel was born in 1883, right? I mean, she just, a different era. And women didn't necessarily stand up, as we do today. So I think that we have to look at her through a different lens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting statement you just made too. I like to look at, I think women today, I think we need to write more stories about women in the past and what they went through so that women today would understand where they stand in relationship in this long line, of women who have step by step by step gotten us to where we are today. And I think that's a very interesting subject to me.
So what was left on the cutting floor?
Oh, there were some interesting rumors. There were rumors that people have wondered about in the books for a long time about Chanel No. 5, whether Ernest Bro, her perfumer, brought it with him from Russia after the Russian Revolution, or whether they created it together, and who knows. I mean, I tend to think she probably created it with him, but there's a lot going on there. You could write a whole book just on that question. Yeah.
So we're running a little short on time coming out. I was going to just ask everyone, any sort of closing thoughts for Pamela on this book? And it sounds like you're writing a series, or at least another one from this one.
No, it'll be independent.
Right, but it's interesting. Yeah. It's the same characters.
Yeah, I got to like them, those two.
I can tell you did. Kristine, some thoughts?
No, I just, the book itself was very eye-opening to me because I have always admired Coco Chanel and the icon and what it all stood for, successful woman power. And it goes along with how women have moved through, the ages. Right. But just to understand and learn the real her was really interesting to me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
She was a fascinating woman, wasn't she? I don't think she'd have made it today. If she started today, I think she'd have a problem.
Yeah. Rita or Amy, any thoughts?
I really don't get that she's that mean. I think she just was she was number one, the father left. The mother wasn't there. So there you've got trust issues and abandonment, and then just everything else was never her way. And I thought her going up against everybody in a man's world, she did pretty good. She was naive, but I think she did pretty good.
But what was funny, you mentioned the daughter of the perfumer outside of Grasse. Because the way you described her, just that little glimmer of this woman she kind of could semi-connect with for one moment, I thought, there's something here, a grain of something here.
Oh, really? That's great. I'm so glad to hear that. It's funny you'd say that because I actually had a subplot including her all the way through, and I took it out because Coco is just so complicated. I thought that would just take away from the book. Well, it's been so nice meeting all of you.
Yes,
It really
thank
is.
you. All right, y'all. Thank y'all.
Thank y'all for the nice words. I love meeting.
We loved your book. Thank you,
Thank you.
Pamela.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah, all of you.